On June 21st, 1529, Catherine of Aragon appeared before a court that would decide whether her marriage of more than 20 years to Henry VIII had ever been lawful. She had remained a faithful wife, supported her husband, and given birth to 6 of his children. Yet Henry now claimed that their marriage had been cursed from the beginning, because Catherine had once been married to his elder brother. He believed this was why God had denied them a surviving male heir. Catherine fell to her knees before her husband and said, "By me ye have had divers children, although it hath pleased God to call them from this world, which hath been no default in me." In today's video, I will tell you about the lost heirs of Henry VIII, and together we will try to discover whether these tragedies were truly the result of a curse, or the work of genetics whose secrets were still unknown in the 16th century. Leave a like and let's dive in. When Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon married in June 1509, Catherine chose the pomegranate as one of the symbols that would adorn her coat of arms. The fruit held a special meaning for her. It was closely associated with her native Spain, but it was also an ancient symbol of fertility. Catherine clearly hoped to give her royal husband as many children as there were seeds inside a pomegranate, and she had every reason to believe that she would be fertile. Both her mother and her sisters had given birth to several children who survived infancy, so no one doubted that the young royal couple would soon become parents. Only a few months later, in November, Henry joyfully informed Catherine's father in a letter, "Your daughter, our dearest consort, has conceived in her womb a living child." The excitement throughout the kingdom was enormous. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of a Tudor heir. As you may remember, the dynasty was still young and far from secure. Henry was only its second king, and England longed for peace, stability, and a legitimate successor. But when Catherine was around 7 months pregnant, she suddenly went into premature labour. Her child, a daughter, was stillborn. Yet even after the birth, Catherine's abdomen did not appear to decrease in size. Her physician concluded that she must have been carrying twins, and that a second baby was still alive inside her womb and would soon be born. From the perspective of modern medicine, we can understand that this was probably caused by swelling, retained placental tissue, or another postpartum complication. But the royal couple trusted the physician's judgment. Catherine withdrew to her chambers and waited for the arrival of the second child. That child, of course, never came, because there had never been a surviving twin. Although the death of an infant was not unusual in the 16th century, Catherine described this loss as a great calamity. We can only imagine what she must have felt, especially since this had been her first experience of motherhood. Henry, who at that point was still a reasonably normal husband, and perhaps even a reasonably normal human being, supported Catherine through her grief. Before long, she was pregnant again. Shortly after midnight on New Year's Day in 1511, Catherine finally gave birth to the long-awaited prince. The boy was named Henry after his father, and was given the title Duke of Cornwall. All of England rejoiced at the birth of the Tudor heir. Henry arranged magnificent celebrations, and a great jousting tournament was held in honour of his son. But this joy was soon replaced by grief. While the festivities were still taking place, the royal parents received the devastating news that the baby, who had appeared strong and healthy, had suddenly died. Little Henry lived for only 52 days. He was buried with full honours in Westminster Abbey, but his grave remained unmarked. His remains were discovered by chance during the Victorian era, making him the only one of Catherine's lost children whose burial place has been identified. We do not know where the rest of her babies were laid to rest. Infant mortality was so common at the time that the graves of children who died so young were often left without permanent markers. Today, however, there is a memorial at Hampton Court dedicated to the lost children of Catherine of Aragon. Should you ever visit, stop there for a moment and think of all those little lives that disappeared almost without leaving a trace. Catherine was, of course, devastated by the death of her son. It was during this period that she became even more devoted to her faith. Unlike a woman today, she could not speak to a therapist, seek fertility treatment, or turn to modern medicine for answers. Instead, she spent hours praying on her knees upon cold stone floors and fasted to demonstrate her devotion to God. Yet such physical deprivation, together with the extremely short intervals between her pregnancies, can hardly have benefited her health. Catherine is traditionally believed to have experienced 6 pregnancies. However, some historians have suggested that the true number may have been closer to 10, with several ending so early that they never became known outside the Queen's household. More than a year passed before the Queen announced another pregnancy, and those months must have been long and deeply anxious for her. But this much awaited pregnancy was soon placed under extraordinary strain, because during its final months, Catherine was forced to help lead a war. In the summer of 1513, Henry left England to campaign in France and appointed Catherine regent during his absence. The Scots saw an opportunity and invaded England, advancing toward Northumberland with an army said to number around 80,000 men. Although she was heavily pregnant, Catherine travelled to Warwick, roughly 200 miles from the front, where she helped rally the English forces with a passionate speech. She did not personally ride into battle, as the Spanish princess would have us believe, but she nevertheless proved herself to be a gifted leader and organiser. Her regency ended in a spectacular military victory. The Scottish army was defeated at the Battle of Flodden, and King James IV of Scotland was killed on the battlefield. But despite this triumph, the physical and emotional strain of the campaign may have taken its toll. On September 17, 1513, Catherine gave birth to another son. Sadly, the child either died during the birth or survived for only a very short time. But Henry never fully appreciated either Catherine's victory or her sacrifice. By that point, his political relationship with her father had become deeply strained, and his resentment inevitably began to affect their marriage as well. And so, another child, the baby Catherine was expecting in the summer of 1514, was awaited with particular impatience. It seemed that this new pregnancy might heal a marriage in which the first cracks had already begun to appear. But in November, the Queen once again went into labour prematurely, at around 8 months, and delivered a stillborn son. The loss of a son who might have restored her husband's favour was therefore doubly painful. Yet Catherine responded in the only way she knew how, through faith. She remarked that God must love her greatly to have granted her the privilege of so much sorrow. But Catherine's prayers were finally answered. On February 18, 1516, she gave birth to a healthy daughter, the future Mary I. No, she was not the long-awaited prince, but at last Catherine had a child who survived. Both Catherine and Henry adored their little daughter and happily embraced their new roles as parents. Henry was actually a loving and attentive father to Mary during her childhood, and he did not treat her with the coldness often shown in television dramas. When the Venetian ambassadors congratulated him, he confidently replied, "We are both young. If it was a daughter this time, by the grace of God, the sons will follow." So the fact that the Tudors attributed this line to the birth of Elizabeth is completely inaccurate. Historically, it was spoken after the birth of Mary. But despite their joy, both parents understood that time was no longer entirely on their side. Mary was a healthy and legitimate child, but she was still not the son Henry believed his dynasty desperately needed. 2 years later, Catherine became pregnant once again. Across the kingdom, churches offered prayers for the Queen's safe delivery. When Catherine told Henry that she had felt the baby move, the king was so overjoyed that he arranged a magnificent banquet to celebrate the news. But during the night of November 9th to 10th, 1518, Catherine gave birth to another daughter, a bitter disappointment for a court still waiting for a prince. The baby was weak and died before she could be baptized or even given a name. For Catherine, this pregnancy and birth would be the last of her life, bringing an end to nearly 10 years of almost continuous attempts to give Henry an heir. And I often think about how simple all of this sounds when we merely retell the story. One pregnancy, one miscarriage, another birth, just a sequence of dates and events. But when we stop and consider what Catherine must actually have endured, the physical pain, the repeated grief, the hope raised and shattered again and again, it becomes almost unbearable to imagine. While Catherine was grieving the loss of what may have felt like her final hope of motherhood, Henry was already deeply involved with one of her ladies-in-waiting, Bessie Blount. Their affair resulted in the birth of an illegitimate son in 1519. The boy was also named Henry and was given the surname Fitzroy, meaning son of the king. Henry openly presented the child at court as proof that he was capable of fathering healthy sons and living heirs. By 1524, Henry had stopped sharing Catherine's bed. She was 39 years old and, by Tudor standards, had passed the age at which women are generally inclined to bear children. Soon afterward, Henry's attention shifted to one of Catherine's own ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, the woman upon whom he would place his renewed hopes for sons and future heirs. Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn, also had every reason to hope that she would give him many children. Her mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, appears to have experienced several pregnancies, although only 3 of the Boleyn children are known to have survived into adulthood: Mary, Anne, and George. After her secret marriage to Henry, Anne became pregnant very quickly. By the time of her coronation in the summer of 1533, her condition was no longer a secret to anyone. Now, all the hopes that Henry and his subjects had once placed upon Catherine fell upon Anne instead. But there was one crucial difference. No one intended to give Anne the same number of chances or the same amount of time that Catherine had been allowed. The pregnancy was surrounded by superstition and expectation. Astrologers consulted the stars and confidently predicted that a prince would soon be born. So much depended on this pregnancy that even the tapestries were removed from Anne's chambers, out of fear that the figures depicted on the walls might somehow influence the unborn child. But on September the 7th, 1533, Anne gave birth not to the expected prince, but to a healthy and vigorous daughter, a girl whose name would one day be known throughout the world, the future Elizabeth I. Henry's disappointment was obvious, even though it was concealed beneath official expressions of joy. The court had already prepared printed announcements celebrating the birth of a prince. After the delivery, clerks were forced to add an S by hand, changing prince into princess, while the magnificent celebrations planned for a male heir were quietly reduced. Only a few months after Elizabeth's birth, Anne became pregnant again. By January 1534, the ever-watchful imperial ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, was already reporting the news. Encouraged by the pregnancy, Henry commissioned a magnificent silver cradle decorated with precious stones, ready to receive the son he was certain would soon be born. The stakes were so high that he even postponed a diplomatic meeting with Francis I of France. But the long-awaited prince never arrived. Exactly what happened is uncertain. Some writers have suggested that Anne experienced a false pregnancy, similar to the one later suffered by Mary I. However, it is more likely that the pregnancy ended in an early miscarriage, leaving behind very little evidence. By 1535, Henry's passion for Anne had begun to cool. She had only one life left, as we might say of a cat, and only one more chance to give him the son upon whom her future depended. That autumn, Anne became pregnant again, and for a time it seemed that fortune had finally turned in her favour. On January 7th, 1536, Catherine died. In theory, Anne had finally won. With Catherine gone, Anne's marriage could no longer be challenged by a living rival. By any practical measure, she was now Henry's only wife and the undisputed Queen of England. But then, disaster struck. On January 24, Henry took part in a jousting tournament at Greenwich. Still proud of his strength and athletic ability, the king charged forward. But something went terribly wrong. When the Duke of Norfolk came to deliver the news, he proceeded with great caution. Anne was pregnant, already under enormous strain and emotionally vulnerable. He broke the news as gently as he could. The king had been injured, but he was alive, and there was no reason to panic. Anne's reaction was immediate. She was horrified. Henry's brush with death was not only a personal terror, it threatened to become a political catastrophe. Had he died without a male heir, the Tudor dynasty could have been plunged into chaos. Elizabeth was still a little girl, barely 2 years old, and it was far from certain that the powerful and divided factions at court would have accepted her as queen. A few hours later, Henry regained consciousness, and it seemed that the danger had passed. But the shock of the accident had already left its mark. A few days later, on January 29, 1536, the very day Catherine of Aragon was buried at Peterborough, Anne miscarried. She lost a male child believed to have been around 15 weeks old. In later years, Anne's enemies claimed that the child had been malformed or monstrous and would never have survived. But this story is not supported by reliable contemporary evidence. The main source behind the rumour was Nicholas Sander, a Catholic polemicist writing during the reign of Elizabeth I, decades after Anne's death. He was determined to portray Anne in the worst possible light, and his account cannot be treated as trustworthy. After losing the long-awaited son, Henry became convinced that God did not approve of his marriage to Anne. How convenient, of course, when every failure could be explained as the will of God rather than as the consequence of his own choices. At the same time, Thomas Cromwell began setting in motion the plan that would destroy Anne and ultimately lead to her execution on May 19th. So, on that January day, Anne did not lose only a child. She lost her final chance to secure her future. Had the baby survived, had Anne given birth to a healthy son in the spring or summer of 1536, the course of English history might have been entirely different. The only woman who fully realised Henry's dream and gave him a legitimate son who survived infancy was his third wife, Jane Seymour. But she achieved this at the cost of her own life, dying less than 2 weeks after giving birth. Even the existence of a healthy son and 2 daughters did not stop Henry from pursuing further opportunities for fatherhood. His political marriage to Anne of Cleves was intended, among other things, to produce another legitimate heir and strengthen the succession. But the marriage was soon annulled. Both Henry and Anne maintained that it had never been consummated, and so Anne never experienced a pregnancy, a miscarriage, or even a real chance of bearing the king's child. Catherine Howard, however, may also have briefly carried a potential Tudor heir. From September 1540 onward, several ambassadors began reporting rumours that the young queen might be pregnant. And naturally, no such story would be complete without Eustace Chapuis, the man who somehow always knew everything about everyone. He wrote that there was some presumption that she, the queen, was in the family way. But nothing came of these reports. Perhaps they were no more than court gossip, inspired by the hopes of servants and courtiers. Or perhaps Catherine really did become pregnant and lost the child at a very early stage. The surviving evidence is too limited to know for certain. After Catherine Howard's execution, Henry married for the 6th and final time. Yet the intimate life he shared with Catherine Parr remains largely hidden behind a veil of uncertainty. By then, Henry's physical condition had deteriorated dramatically. He suffered from severe obesity, painful ulcers, and such limited mobility that he could no longer walk without assistance. It is therefore possible that the couple's sexual relationship was neither frequent nor active enough for a child to be conceived. Catherine Parr's first and only confirmed pregnancy came only after Henry's death, during her final marriage to Thomas Seymour. And by the way, I told the tragic story of their daughter in my previous video, so run and watch it next. But why was Henry VIII, a king so desperate for a son, so unsuccessful in producing healthy heirs? In the end, despite 6 marriages, he had only one legitimate son who survived infancy, Edward VI, born to Jane Seymour. Over the centuries, many theories have emerged concerning Henry's reproductive health. Some researchers believe that Henry may have been Cal-positive, meaning that he carried a rare blood antigen that could have caused serious complications during his wife's pregnancies. Some researchers link these difficulties to the possibility that Henry himself was a product of inbreeding, which may have contributed to so many of his children being stillborn or dying within the first hours of life. Henry's parents shared common ancestors, as did many members of the royal and aristocratic families of the period. Generations of marriage within a relatively limited group may have increased the likelihood of inherited health problems. Another possibility is that Henry suffered from type 2 diabetes later in life. Descriptions of his weight gain, chronic leg ulcers, declining health, and reduced mobility have led some historians to suggest this diagnosis. Diabetes can affect male fertility by reducing sperm quality and contributing to erectile dysfunction. But once again, diagnosing a man who died almost 500 years ago is extremely uncertain, and this theory cannot fully explain the pregnancies and losses experienced by his wives. The truth may have been a combination of genetics, illness, stress, repeated pregnancies, and the limitations of 16th century medicine. What do you think was the most likely explanation? Share the theory you find most convincing in the comments. We often judge the wives of Henry VIII by how unlucky they were in marriage. But if we look more closely, we see women who were unlucky not only as wives, but also as mothers. For them, every pregnancy carried more than hope. It carried fear. The fear of losing another child. The fear of disappointing a husband whose love was never unconditional. The fear of losing their position, their security, and perhaps even their lives. In the end, these queens and their children became casualties in Henry's relentless race for an heir, a king who left behind many graves, including those of his own children.